It's 6:30. I hereby call this workshop to order, and we'll start with Bob Curnow.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council and audience. Just for the audience edification, there is a digital copy of the budget book on our website. So if you go to Peachtree City, peachtree-city.org/budget, you can get a copy of that along with the presentations. So Mayor and Council, this evening we're going to have round 2 of our budget workshop. We're going to have a little bit more detailed conversation presented by myself, Assistant City Manager Justin Strickland, and our Finance Director Paul Salvatore. I'd like to start off just reading into some comments, take us back to the conversation we had of the previous workshop. So the theme for that process, we went through uncompromised excellence, but I also asked a question is, can we afford to own what we currently own? So I understand that we're facing several challenges that include a lean staff, the absence of a formalized project management program, and the need to develop a meaningful facilities maintenance plan. Additionally, we have a city of almost 65 years that's starting to show its age and a significant decline in some of its infrastructure. And if you think back to the previous workshop, I demonstrated what that decline looks like with some photos of the conditions of the facilities and the amenities, just to name a few, where we don't have a programmatic ongoing maintenance program in place. I'd like to emphasize the importance of establishing a comprehensive facilities maintenance program, and by implementing such program to keep our facilities up to date, we can systematically address these issues of our aging infrastructure. This program will allow us to identify and prioritize maintenance needs, allocate resources efficiently, and expend the lifespan of our assets. By taking a proactive stance, we can prevent further decline and avoid a more expensive repair down the line. In terms of staff capacity, I mentioned in the previous workshop as well that during COVID, the reduction in force took its toll on the operational readiness this city needs. There is no amount of training that can overcome significant decreases in staff where single point of failures exist or major bottlenecks have occurred. As a project management professional, I can tell you that the multitude and magnitude of projects that this city has identified in SPLOST, CIP, and with the facilities maintenance plan, we're going to need capacity in many departments to meet these needs. When you look at projects, you look at 3 constraints of a project. Those 3 constraints of a project are time, scope, and cost, and at the end of the day, they all boil down to cost. Lastly, I urge you all to consider what the long-term consequences of delaying investments in maintenance and staff has done. While it may have, and in the past has, seemed financially beneficial to defer the cost of maintaining our infrastructure and diminish our staffing levels, I can assure you that we will continue to compound these issues over time. We risk facing greater expenses, more frequent breakdowns, and the potential loss of valuable assets. By reinvesting in our city's facilities and staff, we can ensure that the preservation of our assets enhance the service delivery and safeguard the well-being of our community. I'm providing for all of these conditions in the 5-year budget that I'm being discussed this evening. So Mayor and Council, with that being said, just a quick reiteration that as per the city's charter, it is the city manager's responsibility to propose a budget, and this is the second workshop. And at the end of this presentation, I'll have a calendar that will show you more dates as they come about. So again, back in March, Council and all of our department directors got together and we attended a retreat. And we defined vision and core values, and that vision was uncompromised excellence, and that followed with those core values that you see on the screen. And again, the uncompromised excellence has been and will be the theme of the budget going forward. From a budget policy perspective, I'm going to read to the top line here because that's very important, and that is that the city's top priority or program priority is to maintain existing service levels in all divisions and departments. So basically, we do that by creating what's called baseline service level funding. Baseline service level funding provides us with an opportunity to identify costs associated with a revenue source. So for example, any deviation from the baseline in any new item that comes into the budget would have an ongoing cost associated with it. We would also identify an ongoing revenue source for that. If you don't have that ongoing revenue source for that cost, then you need to look to the budget to determine whether you're going to make cuts inside that budget and where those cuts could possibly be made. We went back in time a little bit and we found some documentation that previous mayor and council developed as far as the mission statement and what we want to do going forward. And this was a plan that we had to continue with the vision and the core values to develop a mission. But it's very important to understand that this existing mission statement is something that we may need to take a look at from council and staff perspective. But to identify the fact that when you prepare a budget, it should be in line with what your mission is. Your budget's a financial document, but it's also an operational document. And the budget's also, this operational document should be geared towards achieving your vision and mission. So this is what our current mission statement says, and this is what has been in the documentation for the previous budget process. And with that, I'm going to ask Paul Salvatore to continue some of these slides, and again, we'll have some question and answer session at the end.
Okay.
Paul?
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm going to get into some of the financial presentation now of what is the actual proposed budget. I'm going to start with the general fund. This is just what I call the high-level overview, bird's eye view, if you will. Revenues and expenses. I'm showing just a comparison of what our current adopted budget is here on the left. And you could see how we had budgeted to use about $571,000 of cash reserves with that budget. And the proposed budget for 2024, you can see it's about $51.3 million in revenues and $51.4 in expenditures. So we're proposing to spend another $100,000 down of the fund balance. You can see that both percentages are rather large, and this is just indicative of overall inflation that we've been experiencing. So we're looking at about 12.4% increase in revenues, 11.2 in expenses, but even though the percent increase in revenues is a little higher, we're still budgeting to use about $100,000 of cash reserves to balance the budget. And then you can see what the current and projected reserve percentages are. We believe that these are artificially high right now because of the inordinate number of vacancies we've experienced all throughout 2022, which is really what got it up to that level right there. And then so far in 2023, until recently we made changes with the pay and compensation plan, we've been seeing good results with that and the sign-on bonuses and all the things that we did. So I know those vacancy rates are dropping. To drill down a little further into on the revenue side, this just is a chart that shows revenues by major revenue classification. You see majority of our revenue is from taxes, and we have all the other categories, license and permits, and so on and so forth. I'm going to talk about a few of these more significant ones in the coming slides. Again, it's been an inflationary impact that's been driving this 12.4% overall increase, and especially on this investment income, you could see the significant jump there. It's become a very significant source of revenue for the general fund, over $1.1 million. So looking at some of the revenue impacts on those major sources, the ad valorem property tax, of course, number one you look at. We spoke about in the last workshop how we try to look at that as a source of revenue to support our public safety services and operations. We're not looking at any millage rate increase for next year. We want to hold flat into our desires to attain millage rate stabilization, if you heard that term over and over again. We do anticipate a tax digest value increase of about 11%, which again was a major driver of that revenue increase we've been talking about, the overall 12% increase. Altogether, estimating property tax revenue collections next year of 21.6 million. Our second biggest revenue source is the local option sales tax. We're estimating that to go up by about 5% over the 2023 projections. That's about average what we experience, but of course that is subject completely to economic forces that may impact that. And that will we estimate that to bring in about 11.5 million for next year. Now, I mentioned about the interest income. There's two things going on, both rising interest rates and the level of the reserves going up. So between a combination of the two, like I said, that has become a very significant revenue source for the general fund in recent years. So the way we mentioned how we can support, or we try to support public safety operations with the ad valorem tax, to put in perspective, the amount of interest income that we bring in annually now is enough to support the annual operations of the library. It's enough to support the finance department. It's enough to support building maintenance department. So it is a significant revenue source, you know, having those reserves, and the good side of the rising interest rates, although of course it's not good on the debt side. Here I want to show the millage rate history since the recession, when the millage rate was at its peak. Back in 2012, it was back at 7.178. It steadily declined by over 1.1 mils, 1.135 mils to be exact, over the past 10 years. It's also significant to point out in 2017 we had SPLOST as a new revenue source. So we dropped the millage rate about 0.5 mil even since 2017, having that new revenue source coming in, which has now just been renewed coming next month. And then, as I mentioned, plan to hold it flat or stable going into 2024. Another category that we showed up there was the building permits, all classes. This is one that's going the other direction. We expect that to be declining. A lot of the new growth that we've been seeing on the west side has been slowing down. So we're expecting a decrease of about 17% or 185,000 from the current year projections. On the expense side, that'll go down as well because we have a contract offsetting that. So we won't pay as much in building fees for those inspection services. But also the rising interest rates, as I mentioned, they're discouraging for those seeking mortgages or home equity loans. So that's putting the brakes on that as well. So here is a graphical representation of the revenues that we saw on that chart earlier. You can see the vast majority of collections of revenue are from ad valorem tax, property tax, and the LOST. And then when you add in, other taxes and franchise taxes, you're talking about 85% of our revenue comes from some sort of a tax or another. And the other 15% from various sources, the license and permits, as I mentioned, charges for services. We do look at those occasionally. Should we adjust user fees? But you can see, even if you adjust user fees, it's a minimal impact on the overall revenue side of the budget for the general fund. And we're gonna take this one, or?
I got it.
Okay.
Thank you. So you probably remember this slide from the previous presentation. This talks a little bit about some of the expenses and the driving factors that are causing the things that are driving up some of these costs associated with the budget that we're proposing. You remember the conversation and the analogy I gave about the consumer price index, or the CPI, 5.5%, and that's typically tied to a contractual aspect where under normal circumstances that continuation of that contract every year was going to go up at some point. for maintenance costs, and that is typically calculated at about 5.5% or CPI. In addition to that, we've also seen significant costs, and we've brought those contracts in front of council, where we've seen our paving costs and our costs for asphalt going up, 29% increase for asphalt, 55% increase for paving. We've also seen a compounded interest of about 65% for construction prices going up. So that kind of lends itself to the conversation of the fire station that we deemed not feasible due to financial reasons at this point. And it also looks at other construction aspects, contracts that we're working on, because we're seeing significant price increases. So the facility on the back of the police department price increase from previous years' cost to now new costs, so on and so forth. Additionally, we're seeing a 30% across the board increase in technology. And a lot of that's due to the licensing aspect. As we mentioned, the licensors are moving to cloud-based technology or subscription service. But also, interestingly enough, the protections for cybercrime and cybersecurity has gone up instrumental. Just another article came out today, and you've probably seen it in the news, that there have been several federal agencies that have been hit with ransomware and have had their data leaked out on the dark web. So that's a constant battle with those cyber actors when it comes to that, and another reason why to keep our data safe for the city. We've also seen significant increase in police vehicles, our fleet vehicles, and a lot of the equipment that we use for Parks and Rec and for maintaining the city streets and the city parks. We've also gotten ourselves into what I like to call COVID fatigue. A lot of people like to say that the supply chain issues have caused a lot of the delays and a lot of these price increases. What we're seeing right now is that the vendors that we're buying our large pieces of equipment from in our fleet vehicles are asking us to get in line as much as 24 months in advance of taking delivery of that equipment to lock in those prices right now before the price increases are coming up. So from a budgetary perspective, you have to understand that we need to forecast for that 24-month purchase, but we need to start banking on that money right now, locking in those prices now for that to eventually in 2 years from now take possession of those vehicles. And with that, I'm going to ask Justin to give us a little bit of information on budget highlights and expenditures.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about one of the 4 M's. This is the manpower portion, from machines, materials, and money being the other 3. Based on our previous presentation we did a few weeks ago, in which we showed you the needs throughout the city, we focused on what those needs were during our budget process and how we could help with those needs through funding some new positions. Part of this is personnel changes because of the recovery from COVID. We did have a reduction in force in 2020. Yeah, it was before my time. So there was a reduction in force in 2020 when COVID hit. We still have not got back up to those levels of staffing. We've not caught back up to what our staffing was before COVID. We're still, like I said, we're playing catch up on some facilities improvements. And what we're proposing in this budget is an increase net additional positions of 17. And this is a breakdown of those positions. Like I said, most of these positions are to get us back to pre-COVID level staffing, while others were identified as operating needs or based on the changes to the job market. So one example of that, based on changes to the job market, that's been a result of COVID and the economy, is the reduction of, we're taking away 2 part-time firefighter positions and we're adding actual full-time firefighter positions. This is because we can't hire part-time firefighters. If you ask the chiefs right here tonight, if you ask him, there's no job market for part-time firefighters anymore because of low unemployment in the job market. So we would want to just add 2 full-time firefighters. We will be charging some of these positions that we're proposing to SPLOST, as they would be dedicated to working on street maintenance, which is allowed under SPLOST law. One of the few maintenance items that's allowed in SPLOST is paving maintenance. So part of these will be dedicated to our streets and maintaining those. So the total cost that we're proposing with these is about 1.4 million, which about 1.2 would be general fund, 307 coming out of SPLOST. And just to break down these positions by divisions, we're asking for 3 PD positions, 3 police positions, 4 fire positions, 5 public works positions, 2 engineering services positions, which the engineering services positions are the building maintenance techs, which as we're talking about facility needs, we want to up our building maintenance technicians. 2 recreation positions, which also are those maintenance techs, taking care of our recreation facilities. And then 1 executive services position, which is the communications position. And just to give a little bit of context, 1 police officer with salary, benefits, equipment, uniforms, everything they need to actually be a police officer, be on the road, costs the city about $132,000. A firefighter for the same kind of everything, salary, benefits, equipment, everything, costs the city about $100,000. And then 1 maintenance tech, which is your recreation maintenance techs, public works, building, they cost the city about $75,000 for everything. So based on the type of position, the cost of the position can change depending on what the position is. I'm going to pass back over to Paul.
Okay, this is a similar summary like I had on the revenues by category, but this is the general fund expenditures by category as far as our operating departmental budgets. And you can see the breakdown there. I have it with the big 3 or 4 at the top. Again, you could see how public safety is majority of where we spend our money. And on the right here, based on the current digest, the value of average residential property in Peachtree City is $446,000. So this is just basically a breakdown of the tax bill by operational department, where your each, how many pennies of your tax dollar go where. And just to try to put that in perspective. Here is a graphical representation of that chart. So again, you could see just right at the top, there's a great majority of the budget is all for police and fire and public works, including buildings and grounds and recreation. I mean, these are our big major operational departments that make up most of our services that are delivered. Now, a lot of these are all support services that support all operations. So you can see they make up a smaller percent, but they're still an integral part of operations. We have about 7% going for debt service, which is really capital outlay itself. It's a transfer to the debt service fund. This is just a different way of looking at it. Instead of by operational function, this is by how much goes to what category of expense. So as most governments, as you know, are a service industry, we exist to provide services to the citizenry. No surprise that the majority of what we spend is on services, on either our internal personnel or contracted out personnel. Only about 7% is that supplies, that materials piece, except for what comes out from contracts, with outside contractors. Again, we could look at nitpicking through the operating supplies and the line items, but really, if you're looking to make any meaningful cuts to the budget, that's why we always say it has to generally affect personnel if you're going to do anything there. Then we have, again, the 7% going to debt. So this you'll see is up here is one page in your budget books and on the website. I just broke it up onto 2 slides. This is basically just a one-pager, an overall summary of the general fund budget for FY2024, breaking up by sources of funds and uses of funds. We sometimes call this the Boy Scout budget because it's what we give the Boy Scouts when they come and ask for a copy of our budget, because it's all on one page. So you can see again your categories of revenues here as your sources of funds. These other sources, the majority of that is hotel motel tax, even though that you think that's taxes, it's categorized as a special revenue, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then your surplus carryover or use of reserves to bring us up to the $51,462,062 total budget. That's on the sources of funds, and then the same. This is on the uses of funds side. Same total, of course, $51,462,002 is the total budget. You have your departmental operating expenses, your general admin expenses below it. Here's your transfers to debt service and the cash portion of what we need to fund for cash for the CIP. So again, we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. And I also always like to point out that we budget for a savings. So we don't know where it's going to materialize or what have you. We just assume that we're not executing at 100%, that there are going to be vacancies throughout the year. We might find ways to realize savings, when we put things out for bid, what have you. So we just take a lump sum of about $700,000. That's the equivalent of about 0.2 mils of property tax that we just take right off the bottom of the expenditure side of the budget as a anticipated savings. And that's it for the general fund. We want to move on to a couple of other funds known as enterprise funds. They're called that because they operate more like businesses. So first of the two is the Stormwater Utility Fund. We don't have any significant operating changes proposed for this fund for next year. It's mainly because it's locked in by the revenues that we charge. We charge flat amounts for our utility fees, and other than whatever little growth we have year to year, that fund doesn't grow. So we are now, it's been over 10 years, we're due for a cost of service study and a rate study. It's like, as we've been describing all along, as Bob emphasized, if you have the same locked amount of money, about $2.5 million a year that keeps coming in, but we've had this rampant inflation over the past 10 years, there's only so much you can do with that $2.5 million today as opposed to 10 years ago, what you could do with it. So we're going to get going on a cost of service and a rate study for the Stormwater Utility Fund. We do, in the meantime, have about $600,000 included for some new capital projects for continue our pipelining program into next year. Also some capital for vehicles and equipment, $47,000, and a total budget of just over $2.6 million. This is the actual budget that will be in the budget resolution when we go to adopt it in August. That shows the different categories of revenues and expenses, the capital that I just mentioned. And then do also like to point out that the debt service, we had recently refinanced the stormwater bond and realized a debt service savings of on average about $30,000 a year for the remaining 10 years on that debt remaining on the bond. And that number reflects that savings. The other enterprise fund is our amphitheater fund. This has become a very popular facility as of late. Always has been, really. It's been doing well lately, especially due to some of the recent improvements we've been doing over there to the venue, and enhances not only customer experience, but it's been enhancing revenue as well. As you know, we've expanded and improved the picnic table areas, and then we went on more recently, just this year, have improved lawn seating area that was reconstructed. They redid the layout of the floor seating, redesigned it for different experience and feel down there, and then added some new VIP style seating up in the plaza areas up top, which a lot of people find those very popular and selling well. For next year, we do have some upgrades planned for the stage, particularly for the lighting trusses, so we can reinforce those. Maybe get some other bands that are more high-end that have the type of equipment that we want to be able to bring them here, but have the stage that allows for their higher-end lighting. We also want to emphasize that we continue to be self-sustaining. We've been operating without any supplement from the general fund for many years now. So we actually have turning some profits, which we turn around and reinvest in the facility itself, just helping to pay for a lot of these improvements. Again, popular attraction. We've had 8 sold-out shows last year, and so far we've had 5 this year, this season. And these are the numbers, again, to look at it numerically, the budget for the amphitheater fund. See, most of it comes from ticket sales. I can't emphasize enough how grateful we are for the community of sponsors. I guess when you do well, everybody wants to be a part of it, and our businesses have really, really ponied up and chipped in a good significant amount of money, that $271,000, to be sponsors of the Fred. And then there's a hotel motel tax supplement is the only supplement, but that's because those are restricted funds that have to be used for venues like this to attract tourism. I'll talk about that another minute with the hotel motel tax fund. And then on the expenditure side, you see we try to put most of the money into the programs, and then you see this is really just an estimate for those stage improvements that I talked about. Total budget just over $1.7 million. So the hotel motel tax fund, this is a special revenue fund. It is very strictly, regulated. State law, it says how we can spend it or not spend it. So we collected the 8% level. There's a whole section of state law for collection at that level. Basically breaks down between the 6.5% and the 1.5%, which is called tourism product and development, and that is the more restricted piece that I just mentioned. And then we use part of it for the amphitheater. So the breakdown of how we have to spend it by law, if we collected 8%, said 3.5% has to go to our Convention and Visitors Bureau. We get another 3% just goes straight to our general fund for general purposes, and then the 1.5% goes to the tourism product and development. And you see for next year we're estimating about $370,000 altogether for tourism product and development. Only about $75,000 of that we put towards the amphitheater, which is mostly used for advertising and promotion of the venue to get people to come from outside, to visit Peachtree City, stay in our hotels. And there's another $295,000 that can go for any of our other tourism type facilities that have tournaments, such as the tennis center, the PAC, the BMX track, to name a few. So, and that's earmarked for those type of activities. And we're going to kick it back, I think, over to Justin to talk about some of the capital outlay in the CIP fund.
That one. All right, so now moving on to another one of the M's, the machines portion. What I want to highlight with the general fund, so we're going back into the general fund now to talk about the CIP in the general fund, and then I'm also going to go through some slides of some other funds that we use for capital projects. The general fund capital items and programs that are outlined in this budget are programs we've been running for years. A lot of them are not new projects. They're ongoing kind of cyclical things that we do every year. We budget every year $350,000 for facility improvements. And I'll get into where some of that's going here in a minute. We always budget to replace public works equipment in a cyclical nature as needed. We always budget every year. I think since I've been here and before I've been here, for 10 patrol vehicles for police every year to cycle out. We budget for technology replacements and software every year. And then we do always budget a portion of general fund for paving that's non-SPOSS. And most of that, I think every bit of it this year is for our, I say LMIG, Paul says LMIG. I think Dave says LMIG too, but I say LMIG. Most of that is for our LMIG match, which is the grant we get from GDOT, the Local Maintenance and Improvement Grant. So that's for our portion that we will have to pony up for the match there for the LMIG, and then just other vehicles and equipment that are on a cyclical basis for replacement this year. So moving on, I think we were going to open the spreadsheet. Do I need? Okay. And I don't have the mouse, but
There's a Excel sheet there.
so I'll tell you when to move. But so, oh, there we go. Highlighted in blue, that just means that we put these capital items on the lease equipment program. Yeah, our five-year lease purchase program. So that's where we're replacing 2 asphalt rollers this year with Public Works, a couple of trucks. We always replace lawnmowers every year for Public Works and Grounds. And then under facilities improvements, you'll see this is kind of gray here. This is our $350,000. Some of the projects identified to come from that include, Glenlock pool pump replacement, concrete pool deck work at Kedron. Some of the kind of smaller capital items that we can pull from this pot. You'll see here that we had Meade Field light replacements in here. We'll go through that in a minute, but we're pushing that into an ARP project. And then as we go through over the years, you can keep going down. Here's the police vehicles up here.
Quick question,
Yeah.
Justin. What is FM funds from FM funds right there?
Facilities maintenance, that $350,000.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So we had the police vehicles up there. As we go to additional years, if you want to keep going down, so on to 2025, 2026, and into the future, you'll just see that same kind of cyclical replacement schedule is happening here of vehicles, mowers, police vehicles every year for the 10, the facilities improvements for the 350. As we look at the CIP for the next 5 years, it's really just that cyclical cycle of vehicle replacement, facility maintenance. Now, going back to how Bob kind of spoke before, we do need a more dedicated system for facilities maintenance to keep up, to have a better record of when these items are coming up, especially on the facility side. I think we do a good job for our vehicle side. But the CIP, for me, over the next few years, it could be more detailed as we move into adopting a more robust facilities maintenance software and system that we can keep up with that stuff like we do with our vehicles, instead of being more reactive like we've been currently. Is there anything you want to highlight?
No, that's pretty much it. A lot of it is cyclical, like you said, replacement of existing vehicles, equipment, and then our standard match for the street resurfacing, and the $350,000 a year has been kind of a staple. Once in a while you'll see a big ticket item. I think we just passed, if you scroll back up a little, we're just a flat $325,000 for an HVAC system replacement, and we might be getting a grant for that for the library. Some of the maintenance items that we've had in here over the years, because of the cost increase, they became infeasible. So we had like the Kedron Fieldhouse roof. I looked back the last couple of years, and 2021, we had it in the 5-year CIP for $150,000. Last year, we had it in there for $350,000. Now, you know, we're getting closer to doing it and getting estimates, it's $900,000. So it's not like we haven't been planning for it and not had it in the 5-year CIP, it's just, the costs have been skyrocketing and we've got to find, you know, other sources of funds to deal with it.
And some things listed in here too, like we've identified where some of this stuff could possibly come from, but you know, some things we programmed in here, the pool bubble, I think is programmed in here in the very last year in 2028. It may have to be before 2028. You know, this is discussions as councils, as you know, if future years come up, the pool bubble is going to have to be a discussion. Possible GO bond for facilities. So there's some things in here that are programmed, but some things will have to be talked about, especially things that are budgeted in these future years. So we're good to move on to the next slide. Okay, so SPLOST, obviously not a general fund budget item, but I wanted to just, as I think when Paul and Bob and I were talking about how this presentation could go, we wanted to just go over some of the different pools and funds that we have to accomplish some of these capital items that we've discussed and shown you. I do just want to highlight, you know, the 2023 SPLOST did pass in March. It starts collecting next month in July. We do still have some outstanding 2017 SPLOST projects we have to accomplish, such as, I got a couple listed here, such as the Lake Peachtree Bridge. That was approved by council. The construction should start soon, but it still is going to take a while to actually complete that project. It's a complicated project. Some of the other outstanding ones from the 2017 SPLOST are some new paths that we still have to do, like up at North Hill. Huddleston Road is a SPLOST project, which is tied to some other things with some other entities, with WASA, you know, with possible WASA stuff on Huddleston. So we've held off on that project. So there's just a few outstanding still, but a lot of them are either in progress or completed. A reminder with SPLOST projects is that we are mandated to complete them. The ones that were approved by voters, we have to do, unless they're infeasible, in which case we would have to go back to the voters. We cannot use SPLOST for maintenance repair items. The only exception there is for paving. We can use SPLOST for paving maintenance, which is our paths and roads, but for other things we cannot use SPLOST for that. Priority projects, so really the main gist of what I wanted to show you here was just the priority projects that we really want to start with the new SPLOST starting this year as it collects. One is ordering ambulances and fire engines, like what Paul said and Bob said. Right now we have to put orders 2 years out to actually receive these items in 2 years and lock in prices. So if you remember last week, you approved the purchase of 2 ambulances, which is out of this SPLOST. So that was actually your first approval of a new SPLOST project from the 23 SPLOST. We want to get the police SRT vehicle ordered to lock that price in. We want to go ahead and start the K9 additions to get that our K9 capacity up. We do want to go ahead and put in the order for the Public Works skid steer and the robotic mower. And then the big one for actually like kind of bigger projects with the SPLOST that we want to get done this year is the Drake Field restrooms. We want to go ahead and start designing that and possibly get that done before or during next year's event season. And then obviously we're going to continue the road and path paving projects, which are just ongoing every year. And then part of our recreation master plan that we have bid out now is to look at our playgrounds. And one of our SPLOST projects for the new SPLOST is playground updates. So we do have a source of funding for playground updates if our master plan comes back and gives us, you know, a plan on how we need to approach the playgrounds. We do have a source of funding with a SPLOST project related to that. So these next ones I'm going to go through, sources of funds for projects are crucial because there are time limits on encumbering and spending these funds. So at last week's meeting, council approved ARPA funds to be reallocated from the Station 86 project because of what Bob talked about, increasing prices. and not just increasing prices, but because, you know, there's a time limit on these projects, and we feel like we have some projects that we've identified that we could just get moving on now that are a part of our current infrastructure. So this is a list of those projects. You'll notice tennis center renovations are up here, and if you remember as well, we did put in our CIP for the current year we're in future years out for renovations to the tennis center. This includes courts, lighting, and stuff like that. What we decided to do was move that money out of CIP and put it into ARPA under the general government fund to be able to, you know, get that done from this source. LED lighting for athletic fields, the 1.8 million, that's from that 1.8 you saw in the budget for Meade. That's here. Kedron roof, City Hall roof. That's what Paul talked about with we had these programmed into the CIP, but because of the cost and what we have in the ARP, we can get these done now. Let's pull it from ARP. An elevator for City Hall, we don't have one here. We've also identified that the main switchgear here at City Hall needs to be replaced in the next few years because of its age. Our IT HVAC system also needs to be replaced here at City Hall. Because of staffing and office issues, we've also wanted to look at kind of reorganizing the offices and how they're laid out here at City Hall. So that's one project. And then one item we talked about last week was the Flat Creek Boardwalk. That's in here to be pulled from ARPA. We've left it in here because that hasn't been decided yet, but that's in this list. And then finally, City Hall and Stations 81 and 2 to have exterior sealant put on them. Those were also listed in our CIP this year for future years, and it's one that we've pulled out and said we could do this with ARPA now. So the total of all these equals 6.7. What we've allocated to general government now is 6.9, so it gives us a difference of about 236,000, depending on how these come back. None of these have been bid out, so these are estimates as of right now. And by the way, for ARPA, I think you all know because we've said it over and over, the funds have to be encumbered by the end of 2024 calendar year, December, and they have to be spent by December 2026. So there's a ticking clock with these things. That's why we're like, hey, we got some of these, let's move on them.
Justin,
Yeah.
is that set of numbers for the second iteration of ARPA funds or the first? Because it was divided in two separate payments.
It's both. Like
both?
it's the 13.5 million.
Right.
The rest of what we have left in ARPA
Okay.
is allocated for WASA. Is allocated
Yeah. Okay.
for I think it's 5.5 million.
Okay,
is
the
alloc-
reason I asked the 6.7, it seemed to be exactly what they were doing each iteration.
Yes, it is about half of it.
Okay.
So and then 5.5 million is dedicated for water, and then we actually have spent some of it already on. I think we spent about $1 million. Yeah, about $1 million on stormwater already,
Right.
and then we spent some on premium pay, vaccine incentives. We did some of that when we first got the funds about 2 years ago.
Thank you.
Yeah. So this is just a drone picture of the roof of City Hall. It's not leaking now, like just from my experience of working here, it's not leaking yet, but we do know just from how old this is, when it was put in, that this has got to be replaced soon. And just showing the condition of it. There's some water pooling up in some areas there. This is the roof at Kedron. You can see it's been patched in some places, but it's you can see Kedron's a big facility, so that's going to be a big project, and it's also on the list. It needs to be done. All right, other capital funds, impact fees. So we do have another source for projects, impact fees. These are collected when new growth comes into Peachtree City, like the west side, like Everton, Crestwind, any industrial expansions we have, they pay into our impact fees. There are also time limits on encumbering and spending these funds. The time limit is 6 years from collection, so that is different depending on when we collect them. You know, we get them every month, so just depending on when we collect them, there's a 6-year time limit on spending these. They pay in for cultural recreation which is kind of deceiving because really what we've defined that as is they can only exclusively be used on paths. So we have about 4 million that we need to spend on path projects. We've got about $500,000 in fire and about 400,000, 380 in police. The police portion is probably going to go, I'm about to go into the next slide with our debt. The police portion is probably going to have to be used on the police expansion that we're going to talk about here in a minute. And then the fire department, we're pulling some of that to keep designing Station 86. But these funds have to be spent within the time limit.
Hey, Justin, I got a quick question on that slide.
Yeah.
You've got $4.9 million, and you said has to be spent in a certain amount of time. Have we received all of those funds and they're in the bank? We just haven't
Yes.
yet allocated them out to specific jobs. Is that what or projects, I should say?
Yes. Correct.
And that list is the one that you looked at before, or is this going to be a separate list for this encumbered funds?
This list?
Yes.
No, this is ARPA,
Right, so that goes away.
completely separate.
And now you've got this fund, which is impact fees, but there, I don't see a list of projects yet. Is that coming?
So the police one, we know that it's probably going to have to go to the next slide that I'm going to get into. Fire department, we originally were going to pretty much spend all that down on Station 86. Now that we're not doing Station 86, we are going to spend it on design still of 86. But it also can go to supplement, like I can go ahead and tell you with fire, the budgets that we have for Station 85, which is a SPOS project, and Station 82 are not budgeted, they're lower than what that's going to cost. So these funds could go to supplement the SPOS funds to build the new fire stations.
But they have to stay with public safety.
Yes,
So
they
those
have to
impact
be-
fees, they
they
go
have
to
to be spent on
fire and
fire.
they go to police.
Right, they have to stay in fire and police.
That's
Okay,
correct.
Good.
And the other key with impact fees, I don't think I said this, the other key with impact fees is they have to be spent on new things. They cannot be spent on repairs of old things. Like they can't be spent to repair Station 82. They
Okay.
have to be spent on a new fire truck, a new fire station. Same thing with paths. These funds cannot be spent to repave our paths. They can only be spent on new paths or new bridges or new tunnels. They can't be spent on repairing old things.
And what's the approximate amount of time you've got to be able to encumber all this?
Well, you have to spend it within 6 years of collection.
Right, and we've already got all of that in the bank. How much time do we have left?
Depends on when each
Each one will be
Each one was
different from when
collected.
you
We-
collected it?
we
I
get
got
these
you.
every month, yeah.
I got it. Thank you.
I think I talked to Robin about this earlier today. We're not really pushing up against a wall yet on any of these except maybe police. Like police, we need to spend some of this, but on the next slide, you'll see we've got a plan to spend it. So next one, another pot we have is in 2022, we took out a facility bond. The original balance was $3.5 million. It was originally intended for several public safety facility projects, which included the Station 86 project. Now with the infeasibility of that project and how much we have actually gotten back on the estimates of the police expansion, all of this money needs to go to the police expansion. So the police headquarters expansion is now the only project for these funds, and the current remaining balance is $3.3 million. I think the cost of the project right now is at 3.2, and that doesn't include the $500,000 generator that needs to go with the police station, because right now the generator the police station has does not actually power the entire police station, much less the expansion it's going to have. So we're looking at about $3.8 million for that project, and that goes back to supplementing that debt, the 3.3, with some of these impact funds, and then even having to supplement it maybe a little more with maybe pulling into fund balance or something like that. And I think that's it for all the pots of money for capital.
Yeah, we'll do like to end up showing the 5-year financial model, although this may be at the point where people's brains freeze up. Try to make it as simple as possible. But again, starting over on the left, it's just chronological order. You can see as a result of the audit in 2022, I mentioned how we saw an increase in fund balance that jumped us up over the 50% mark. Again, most of that was due to just unplanned for vacancies. It may look like a good thing, like, oh, we got all this money in reserve and had such a surplus, but when you're not executing because you can't hire police, you can't hire firemen, you're losing part-timers. It was even hard to hire some public works people at that time. You know, it generated, you know, excess reserves over the 50% we normally have. We budgeted to spend those down to 47.1, but in the current fiscal year, now I did this projection, you know, over a month ago, so depending on how things go, and I'm hearing, you know, that we are getting more up to full employment, you know, we may or may not realize that additional increase in reserves this year. We could be flat for all I know. But it's showing it going up a little bit more this year as a result of additional vacancies and also revenue collections in excess of what we had anticipated. You know, I wouldn't sit there and anticipate we're going to have, you know, 6 or 8% increase in sales tax, and then, you know, it doesn't materialize, but then it does due to both, you know, inflation and full employment. People are out spending money, and then, you know, they end up collecting revenues in excess of what was budgeted as well. So here's the FY 2024 proposed budget that we've been talking about for the general fund, and anticipated use is spending down 100,000 of that cash reserve. And then you could see in future years that reserve balance going down further and bringing it down to just under 48% over a 5-year period. Again, you know, those reserves, at least in the meantime, are generating close to $1.2 million a year in interest income, which again is enough to fund the operations of several departments. So it's, in addition to being there for, you know, unforeseen contingencies. So we realize, you know, there's a desire to spend down some of these reserves, and you know, we are getting the percent down. But as Justin emphasized, and why we had those right before this slide, was that we have 3 big pots of money that have, you know, the clock is ticking on. We need to spend them in a certain amount of time, or we jeopardize losing them. So the good thing is, in the meantime, this is generating revenue for us. Again, down at the bottom, we see the millage rate. We try to attain millage rate stabilization, and you know, it's about as stable as you can get. It's just straight across. We don't have any anticipated millage rate increases to achieve any of or all of these facility improvements or other things that we've been talking about. And I think Bob had some closing remarks.
So you probably remember this slide. We kind of shrunk the pictures down a little bit, but they still hurt to look at. You know, so just a couple of things, you know, some takeaways here. As you can see, we have a lot of projects in front of us. We have some time constraints on some money that we need to get going. We have some bids that need to get on the street. We have a lot of major areas that we need to start working on as far as critical infrastructure of the city is concerned. So to me, I put my project manager hat on for a second. I start looking at the 3 constraints that I talked about earlier, and the biggest one is our capacity. And a capacity not from being able to use the money that we have identified for these projects, but the staff's capacity to actually get these projects done. I'm very familiar with working in lean organizations. The organization that I came from prior to here kind of pride itself on being a lean organization. However, lean organization here has a different meaning. Lean here is to the bone. We have a couple of departments here that are at critical mass where we are dealing with some shortages in those departments that are actually causing bottlenecks in our ability to effectively and efficiently get work processed through. And that work processed through means that residents that are interacting with the city are running into challenges on getting things processed through them fast enough. We did a great thing back a couple months ago when we did our salary and benefits compensation package, and we start getting a lot of applicants flooding in, and all those applicants flood into a department called Human Resources that has also been decimated and is also at critical mass. So what I don't want to do is I don't want to have a bunch of projects stacked up and not have enough capacity to drag any of these across the finish line, because at the end of the day, a project has a definitive start and a definitive end, and we need to be able to get to the end on some of these in order to spend some of that money. So I just wanted to bring our attention one more time to something that has recently come to light, and this is Drake Field. And the last time I mentioned that, we had an estimate that we came in of about $550,000 to mitigate the drainage issues here. So anybody that's been out there knows that on a beautiful day, that's a great place to walk around. But if it rains 2 or 3 days later, you can't walk on that field. And Frank's not here, so I can't yell at him. But they basically, the dredging of the lake put all the silt of the lake on this field, and it impacted its ability to drain effectively. So this is an awesome place to continue to have events here, but we have to have events here only when the season allows for that field to be dry. If we were to invest, and this is not a funded project, this is a project that just came up and is one of those things that we're going to have to look at from a staff and a council perspective to make that decision. If we want to use this for future iterations of things, during the good times and the bad times, that field needs to drain appropriately. And then just bringing us back to where I started the conversation in the previous budget meeting, how I look at sustainability in the city from 3 different viewpoints. Operational sustainability talks about the staff and the staff's capability of getting these projects done, and that's that project load. So you have to balance your project portfolio, and you have to spread that project portfolio over a period of years. And the other thing is I want everybody to understand that I'm very real about this as well. We didn't get into this situation of these maintenance issues and these facilities overnight. They have been ongoing for some time, and they've just been building up. I'm not planning on getting us out of this situation overnight either. What I am doing, though, is I'm spreading this project load and those facility load over the next 5 fiscal years to make sense. So that's why you see some spend down in reserves. That's why you see a systematic approach to this from a project perspective of identifying when we go out to bid and when projects are led and things along those lines, because we need to be very strategic about that, and we need to make sure that we've identified the people, the funding, and the timeline in which those projects need to get done. So here's a quick view of some upcoming meetings, and this again is all information that's in the packet, but for council's edification, there's some important dates up here. So on the 13th of July, we have a public hearing on our capital improvement program at a regular council meeting in the proposed budget. And then we have a couple of dates here in August. Some of them are tentative, but notice that there are a couple of public hearings, and there are some requirements here as far as the millage rate is concerned on how many of those public hearings that we have to have. So that's a future timeline of where we are with the budget. And at this point, staff is here to answer any questions that council may have.
Just an observation. Gleaning from the slides you showed, the city taxes, property tax that we pay for a $446,000 home is $1,100 a year. That's actually less than Tyrone, and it's actually less than the city of Fayetteville. So Peachtree City, living here is a bargain in that regard. But by the same token, when I first looked at this book, I saw from 46,000 to 51, or 46 million to 51 million. Wow, that's a pretty substantial jump. And then the last slide, Paul, that you showed with the budget from 2023 into 2024, we've got a surplus of 56% in the reserves, and we've actually added $3.49 million or something to that effect. The citizens are going to come back to us and say, you know, you got an 11%, 12% increase in your budget. You know, we need to get out there and justify what we're doing. And I know from the maintenance side that we're catching up, and I know that, we just got this money, but we just gotta sell Peachtree City to keep it the way it is. We just can't cut, I would say if we cut a mill on a $446,000 home, that's gonna reduce that tax base from $1,100 city tax to, 960, something like that. Am I correct?
About.
That thought doesn't cross my mind, so.
That's,
I mean, but, you know, but for
I was thinking about 900.
$150, you know, that's what it would cost to take a whole mill away from your city tax. And I'm just of the opinion that I really like living here, and I think $100, less than $100 a month in property tax ain't bad. So,
Or a year, less than $1,100 a year.
yeah, that's all it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're looking at the amenities we have, the cart paths, the police, the fire, I mean, just those alone are $100 a month. Like you said, Mike, it's a bargain.
It is.
I appreciate, Bob, I appreciate you going around and looking at our facilities. You know, I want to say ever since I've been here, the city has, well, we grew as a city, and we got, I had to say it, builder's grade items in all of our facilities. And then we've gone through and we're starting to update them, but those issues are still there, and they're still compounding. I rode my bike last Friday. I went to the park right over here at Pebble Pocket, and this is a culture that I appreciate that Bob's trying to change. I think we all need to, I mean, I'm certainly in agreement with it, and I hope the general public will too. The culture of, we've got to fix it. You go to this park right over here, there's 2 basketball courts that were redone not too long ago. Well, there's no nets on the basketball hoops. I mean, really, think about that. That's just something that's minor, but it's the culture of, we don't have the time, we don't have the money, we don't have the manpower. We need to dig deep and make it happen. I appreciate you working on that, Bob.
Thank you.
Mr. Holland?
As I went over the budget here, first of all, I want to thank Bob. It's really a very detailed budget, and I don't like the idea that I spent the last 2 days going through this budget, but you know, you've got to understand it, and that's my first time going through this, so I spent the time to go through it. I will say, the one thing that jumped out at me, there's a lot of things that jumped out, but I'm not going to go over a lot of them. Basically, I look at the departmental operating expenses that jumped from 35 million less than 24 months ago to 46 million, almost 47 million, a $12 million increase. That's 34% increase in departmental operating expenses. And I don't have yet all the detail on that, but I look at that and that jumps out and says, investigate. Why is that going up? And I think you've detailed some of that from the maintenance side, but I don't see all of that in here. So that's something I want to look into over the next couple of weeks before we come back. The other thing that I see and jumping out at me is that we have an excess over 50% of the excess above the 50% level that's budgeted in here at about $3 million. And we don't have a place at this, I don't understand where we have a place that we're going to spend that, or we're just going to carry that forward
Are you
from
talking
year
about
to year.
in the reserve?
Yeah, in the
reserve
reserves,
balance?
yes, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so we do, so we're looking at, again, there's a couple of things with the reserves. So your reserves are, some people call it a rainy day fund, some people call it a disaster fund. I look at the reserves at having a plus or minus 50% of your reserves. With a $50 million budget, that's about, do the math, right? So that's about half of our budget. So understand that your budget for one fiscal year is a year in totality. That reserve balance would cover you for about 6 months of city operation in absence of any revenue source coming in. So if everything were to stop and we weren't collecting any more money whatsoever, the money that's in your reserves would be carrying you and paying for the cost of the city operations for that period of time. So 50% of a year is 6 months. That's how much we have in the reserves. The other thing is from a healthy reserve perspective, it's what gives us opportunities to have AAA bond rating and have all of our rating agencies look at us in a favorable position. So we have been rated multiple times in the last couple of months. One when we did our bond refinance, Paul talked about saving that $30,000, and they've all come out AAA bond rating. The other thing is they look at that and they make sure that you're not dipping into your reserves drastically over a long period of time. So what we're doing is we're systematically looking at that reserve balance, and we're systematically using that fund over the next 5 years to draw down that balance, paying for some of these large ticket items. Now, that's the last bucket that we're going to, because we have some time-sensitive money areas that we need to spend. So the ARPA being one, and the impact fees being the other. So once we start identifying those projects and we have them in the books and we have them let out, then we're going to start looking at where the other funds come into play, and that would start drawing down on some of those reserves. We do actually show some money coming out of that fund balance this fiscal year, and then that number declining over the next 5 fiscal years. But we want to try and maintain that 50% number, because that's what council has told me, that they want to keep that number around.
I understand that, and I wasn't really going in that kind of depth, but I appreciate the answer you're giving me. Basically, what I was looking for is, do we have anything to use that $3 million that we have over and above the 50% level for reserve funds?
We have plenty of projects to use that money on, and so the answer to your question is yes. We have not identified that fully at this point, because we're still working on that larger master plan of facilities. But as long as that money is in reserves, we can go back and use that money, systematically and strategically over the next fiscal years.
Okay, we'll keep a close eye on that. The next one last one is, just, again, it was on the 5-year fiscal financial projections. And I noticed that one of them dropped dramatically. The motor vehicle portion from 23 to 24 dropped to 2.5, almost $3 million. What was the cause of that?
I'd have to look. Paul, do you want to?
Motor vehicle ad valorem tax? Or?
Yeah, it says motor vehicle portions. On
So that's being phased out by the title ad valorem tax. So I know every year we've been seeing it.
It is. It's dropped. You have it dropping about $1 million beyond that, but this first year it dropped almost $3 million. And was that something that went on this last year, from this last year to this year?
It's probably the value, not the actual revenue, but the value. Are you looking at the tax digest?
Yeah, this
sheet?
is the ad valorem tax projections.
Yeah, so it's probably the value of it. The vehicles that
Clint, is that on the screen up here that you're looking at? Councilman Holland?
So the millage rate would apply to that. It's probably on our website,
Okay.
or I could maybe bring it up.
This was in what you sent out to us,
Yeah.
and that's
That's in the
what I was-
backup. Yeah, we can get with you
Yeah,
on that
so
and make sure that
the-
that's clear.
Appreciate
Yeah,
that, just to
Still a
understand what
good
it is.
question, but yeah, it is in relation to the value of 12.6 million to 9.2 million.
Exactly.
Yes,
And
so,
then-
yeah.
And then it drops 1 after that.
Yeah, we're deliberately anticipating the value to drop, and those are the older vehicles that are still subject to the old ad valorem tax. Now, as you know, like in recent years, if you buy a car, you just pay the one-time upfront title ad valorem tax, and that's where the majority of our vehicle ad valorem tax revenue comes from now, is the TAVT, and that's becoming a dwindling and less significant revenue source every year from the old ad valorem taxes from the older vehicles.
We used to have to pay, correct me if I'm saying this incorrectly, we used to have to pay for the value of the car ongoing.
Every year.
And then now in Georgia, you pay, in essence, a almost set amount instead of that for your tags.
Okay.
And so and then that is why that number keeps going down, because that revenue source is now going away. Is that correct?
That's correct. So as people get rid of those older cars, replace them with the newer ones, they no longer pay the ad valorem tax on that old jalopy, and then they'll pay a TAVT tax if they go to replace it and buy a new car or a used car.
I appreciate you spending time digging into the weeds, and maybe we can do a little bit of this offline, but
Yeah.
certainly, and I've still got some questions, but I'm not going to take
No.
up the time to do that tonight.
No, and I might also address what you said about the reserve and maybe 3 million ahead, like at a point in time. I did want to emphasize that when you look at it over the 5-year period, that is a situation that will correct itself naturally, where you will be below 48% over a 5-year period as the budget continues to grow and the reserve dollar amount remains flat. So if you would take 3 million out right up front because it's over now, and then other things equal, then you'd be down closer to 45 or lower percent, out in year 5. So,
I understand what you're saying. It's just a number that jumps out. It's, $3 million that maybe we can do something else with, and I think the city manager says, we got plenty of things that we can do with that $3 million. So there you go. We got an answer.
Anything else?
Nope, that's all I got.
I have a couple questions. Bob, referring back to the photos you showed us last workshop, which were pretty devastating, I mean, really upsetting and embarrassing. To what extent will this budget that you're proposing at 6.043 be able to address the facade at City Hall, the damage that we see in the corollary building at the tennis center, the office, the carpet, the flooding? To what extent will we be able to restore the insulation and the mold and the damage at the fire stations, the landscaping photos that you showed us? Is this budget going to achieve what we need to achieve?
Yeah, so we have programmed out some of those critical areas. Obviously, we prioritize that list based on that level of criticality. So whereas the resurface, pressure cleaning and sealing a building may fall to a lower priority than fixing the insulation at a fire station. So we looked at this very programmatically and defined where that is. So there's going to be a lot of those projects that you see on there that we're identifying coming out of the ARPA funding, and that's the money that we immediately need to spend. So council did the previous council meeting, we decided not to move forward with Fire Station 86 and took that money from ARPA and put it back into this. So that really is going to kickstart a lot of these projects for us. And then it really comes down to getting a calendar laid out in front of us and then start marking down on that calendar these projects and lining them up so that we have a very systematic approach to how we're going to roll those out. So a lot of those things that you saw in that presentation are going to be addressed. The big ticket items are going to be addressed. And then we're going to be looking at, some of the other things as we go through the rest of the fiscal years. But again, those things, I just want to reiterate, those things took a long time to get to where they are right now. So just understand that it's not going to correct itself overnight. But as long as we've identified a plan moving forward, and that plan has a consistent cadence to when these projects come out, we're going to start seeing some major progress on those.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, just commenting on that, I mean, the pictures you showed, that's like, I want to say the tip of the iceberg. Am I safe saying that?
Hey, oh, absolutely, yes.
It's kind of like a symptom of the problem. It's
It
not
is.
the problem, it's a symptom of the problem.
Yeah, and some of those things we have to be careful and cautious of, because once you turn that stone over, just because you see the moss growing on that side, you don't know what lives underneath. And that's really kind of the situation we got to at the tennis center, where we had some flooding and we had some carpet damage and some wall damage. And the next thing, you keep looking and you keep looking and you keep finding and you keep finding. So you either stop looking or you start working on fixing some of those issues. So that's kind of why we moved that project up to the lead, because there are just some significant things over there that need to get taken care of.
Question or a comment for you. When you're going through all these projects, and we've all seen the pictures, and I'm glad that you did some, pictures of all of those. It would be nice for our communications people here at the City Hall is to let the citizens know, here's what it was before, and we fixed it, and here's the answer. So now they know we're spending the money on things that make a difference for the citizens of this community.
Yeah.
And I think that if you could pass that along to your department to
Absolutely.
take care of, I think that's a good way to help
Yeah, I
inform
don't-
the people out there
I
that
don't
we're
like
spending our
showing
money
just the
right.
bad. I like showing the good as well. So we're going to show progress as we go through there to make sure everybody is on the same page as to what it
Excellent.
is we're working on.
And I'm sorry, Kim, just want to say, along that same line, we kind of talked about that in our meeting, and Bob had a good point. Well, let's face it, we can't be proud of the way some of our facilities look, and so we want to go, hey, look how bad everything looks. Well, people out there, I like what you said, do the before and after.
Yep.
Right? And not broadcast everything.
Yeah.
But,
Make sure you got the after picture, so before you put them all out there, you show the before and the after.
Right.
Here's what it was and here's what it is today.
Yeah.
All right. I had a couple things I wanted to be sure and talk about tonight. You covered one of them, and that is the Drake Field, drainage problem, which is chronic and probably $500,000 worth that we still don't have budgeted in this that I can see.
Correct.
Okay. And another one is Battery Way Park. I just want to bring up to this council because, and Clint, you weren't here last year on council when we approved the SPLOST list, and we decided we would not include renovation of Battery Way Park on that list. Remember, we had that conversation. We wanted to see it on the list, but some of the neighbors in that area were concerned because they didn't want to have to look at bathrooms. And we didn't want that to jeopardize an otherwise really decent $67 million SPLOST list. But we agreed at that time we were going to take a serious look that we would renovate that park. And I want to keep renovation of Battery Way Park with bathrooms on our radar and not forget that. We talked about that. And again, that was last year, you weren't here. But I think that's going to be another big ticket item that we need to keep on the front burner. I still support that. I did last summer and I still do. Another one I wanted to ask this council if we're ready to take a look. Over this long holiday weekend, I took my grandsons to C.J. Smith Park in Noonan to use the pump track on their little scooters, and they have off to the side a splash pad. And they can just wander over there. There's no fence. They can wander over there, and all the children know how to push that button and start the water. Are we ready to make our splash pad free of charge? Noonan has 2 splash pads, and they're free. Fayetteville has 1, and it's free. Ours was a SPLOST-built project, and to the best of my knowledge, that's the only SPLOST-built facility where we still charge people to use it. I think we were concerned last year when we talked about it, about overuse, or that it might be overrun with kids, and I can tell you that has absolutely not happened. I've taken...
Didn't we change, we did change the rates, right?
We did. We changed it from $5, $6 to $2, $3.
I think it's something we can think about.
I think we should think about it. Would you think about it? All right.
We're not gonna make the decision tonight.
Agreed. And then I have one more thing. Bob, you mentioned citizen engagement committees and advisory groups. Are you in a position to share what you have in mind?
Yeah, sure. So, one of the things that's on my other list is putting out a lot of citizen engagement opportunities. So we're working on right now 3 opportunities. We have a rec master plan come up, so go back to the conversation about the Battery Way and the bathrooms in the park there. That's going to be included in our conversation when we go through the recreation master plan and talk about the re-engineering of that park and the amenities that are there and refreshing that and making sure that bathrooms are, definitely something that's looked at. So we're going to be establishing a rec group. One was already established here at the city. It's created by ordinance. It has some dated language in it, and we brushed that off thanks to the clerk's office. We're going to be bringing that back in front of council.
A rec, what do you mean rec group?
Like a recreation group
Yes,
committee.
yes.
And that's going to help us make some long-term decisions. And what I really want is to have ambassadors of the city be participants on that and all of our committees. And we're going to be really looking at that, especially from a recreation master plan. That's going to look at everything that we have in amenity-wise in the city. And it's going to really give us some evaluation criteria, and it's going to stack us up against other municipalities and what they're doing. So as you mentioned, other cities and how they're using their rec, they're going to bring us back those good ideas and those examples. And at some point, I want that to boil down to some subject matter experts that are on that committee to help us make some long-term decisions for the city on should this be the type of amenity that we have, and how many do we need, and a lot of those decisions coming back to that aspect. The other one, we're looking at a paths advisory group. So I've been hearing a lot of call to action by residents in regards to our multi-use paths, and I think it's a really good opportunity to bring that back. Again, some subject matter experts that look at safety, take into consideration the speed of vehicles, the types of vehicles, because that dynamic has changed quite a bit in a very short period of time. So I think it's important that we address that by having people to really help us identify the proper use of our pass system and make sure that it's amenable to everybody that's using it, from walking to running to electric bikes to carts and things along those lines. And then the last one we want to do is we want to really engage our youth. So at the beginning of this council meeting, you know that we had some interns that are working with the city. There's a couple of them over here that have come to our council meeting. And we're looking at setting up what we call a teen political forum. And that's going to engage our high school students. And that's going to bring them into the government fold and have them understand the civics and the functionality of government. And in this example, how a manager-council relationship works, and just general government practices. So we want to bring them in. We want to have council set up with the teens, and we want to have council and staff participate and just kind of really spread the knowledge of what we do and why we do and how we serve. Those positions in government are becoming harder and harder to fill. So what we'd like to do is we like to make sure that we're tapping into that knowledge base that's in high school. So those folks that are going off to college maybe want to take some political science classes and maybe fill your seats one day.
Fantastic.
Excellent.
Maybe you ought to get the high school to look at it for a civics instruction.
We can certainly do
They
that.
haven't taught it for a while.
Sounds like we have a instructor sitting next to us.
In 6 months, 20.
Council, anything else?
Yeah, Mayor, I have a couple more things. One of the things that I got confused on was on potential reapportionment of things that are SPLOST related. For instance, if you needed to have something go on, which say a storm came through and took out all the doors and windows on the side of the building, and, you know, can we use SPLOST funds reapportioned to do those kinds of repairs, because it is on a capital equipment, a
No.
capital project?
Not unless you go back to the voters.
You gotta go back to the voters for that.
And,
Natural disaster.
well, yeah, I mean, a natural,
It'd be
Yes.
like a natural, like a
Something
hurricane,
like-
not hurricane, but maybe a tornado comes through here and
Yeah.
rips up a part of the building here.
so natural disaster is allowed under SPLOST law as far as repairs,
Okay,
but you can't just, council can't make the unilateral decision to say, we're gonna take from this project that was approved by the voters and put it towards that. Like,
Okay.
you can't do that.
okay. But it can be done, but it's gotta be done appropriately through the voters. Understood. The other one is, did we ever have a public infrastructure plan in this city? Does anybody know if we did or didn't have that? An infrastructure plan for the city. What are we gonna do and what are we gonna plan for, like a 5-year or a 10-year plan? I know we did it in business. I don't know if it was done at the city level on what you're gonna be doing.
So are you talking like a strategic plan,
Yeah,
or?
like a strategic plan, but more to at a tactical plan of how you're going to do it once you get the strategic plan in place.
Yeah, so like we have a capital improvement program right now that we're building a lot of these projects off, and then identifying the maintenance and things along those lines. But yes, they're outside of the comprehensive plan that was done, that had some milestones in there. You know, there needs to be that tactical plan, and that's what we're working on right now. That's that 5-year forecast in the budget.
Right.
And at the very beginning of the meeting, I talked about needing to have a mission, and then you actually use that mission as an operating document to help you forecast out, you know, how you're gonna achieve those tasks. So that's something that we're working on right now. We're just we have so many projects in the hopper that we need to make sense of those and prioritize those.
Thank you. One last one, Madam Mayor, and then I'm done. The last one is, all of the Line Creek repairs that we've been talking about. I thought about this, and
Flat Creek.
I'm sorry, I said line, boy, sorry, Cal.
It's going around.
The Flat Creek. And basically, I remember when I was a Boy Scout, and I said this last meeting, that we actually helped out by building things. Have we ever considered talking to the Boy Scouts, because they can get merit badges, and bring them in and have them assist in doing some of the things at Flat Creek? Just a thought, because that's really a good thing for the young people to get involved in government.
So the Boy Scouts do come to our Public Works Department a lot to do Eagle Scout projects and stuff like that, and we talk with them about certain projects they could do. I could let Dave and Jonathan speak to this, but I don't know if we would use Boy Scouts
Not to build.
Not to build.
No, we're not talking about the build, but maybe some other help out on these projects. It doesn't
They
always have
do.
to be the one that is at Flat Creek, but it could be other projects.
Yeah,
and-
they do come
And they
in
earn
and-
these merit
yeah.
badges, and it's a good way to get them into the civics.
I've met with
Or-
them. I think Jonathan's met with them. Like, yeah, they do come and propose projects to us sometimes for green belts and for the path system. We've had a lot of them have built those grab-and-go libraries that are on the path system. I think one of them, when I first came here, did something with some mirrors at a tunnel. So yeah, they do come and propose some projects to us, and we just, from our perspective, we just always have to make sure that they'll be safe and that we, what
Of
they
course.
put in, yeah.
Of course.
But yes, they do reach out to us. The scouts, like the troops, their instructors or their troop
Scoutmasters.
leaders, scoutmasters, yeah.
Scoutmasters.
Like they'll reach out to us with their parents and they'll have a little proposal that they'll bring with them and they'll come meet with us. Yeah, we do that.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Anything else?
Nope.
Council, anything else? Bob, do you have anything else?
No, I'm all set, thank you.
Thank you very much. We stand adjourned.